From an international perspective, because of course we are an international channel, how do you think the rest of the world looks upon the US right now?
Well, I think it hasn't changed because they've gone through this a handful of times, that they're looking at this uncertainty and seeing the internal political aspect to it and not really changing of what the economic conditions are of how they do it until we start seeing that it is an actual official shutdown and it happens to go for many, many days. I think the up and downs of is it going to happen, is it not going to happen, isn't really so much of a concern for the international community because they've seen this show before. And now the question really becomes what comes out of it and what's stability behind this. I think when you think of the global financial markets, right, I don't think you'll see too much panic just yet, but it does, every time that this happens, it becomes a conversation going, here we kind of go again, and is it going to get better? And it's kind of the same story over and over again where there's a rush to the end to try to get a deal done.
And if it happens, as I mentioned to Sean earlier, it will be the fourth government shutdown in a decade. For an international audience, it's hard to get your head around that. You know, why is it happening so frequently now? And, you know, what kind of an effect do you think it's going to have on daily life?
Yeah, you know, I think the question before in the old days or decades ago, this was handled just from an economic perspective and ensuring the debt ceiling and the spending. But now there's so many different measures that are tied to this. When you think of like the everyday, again, if this occurs for a very long time, it will have an impact. You know, if you think about what services they have, you know, you think about TSA, right? The TSA came out and said, you know, 95% of its workers would be affected to it. That means you have delays in travel. You would have delays in FDA, you know, federal FDA approvals, you know, permitting, trade. You know, I can keep going down the list. You know, veteran services, and even from a military perspective, you know, the bases and equipment. Yeah. So it just kind of, there's a long list. If this is going to be a longer period of time, there will be a delay in the way that people pay and even in trade in that degree. And, you know, we won't see it right away, but it does change the way people interact here in the U.S.
I think that military point of view is an interesting one. I mean, more than 50% of federal funds go to the U.S. military. The military could potentially be in furlough, so not get paid. What would that mean for, you know, the US ideology of protectionism, of globalization? If the military aren't being paid, how can goods and services be protected globally, and even conflict zones where the US military is based?
Yeah, it's a great question. And typically the military defense position is not affected in this conversation, but you know, when you think about supporting climate issues and you know, Paris Treaty and those kind of funds, they do have an issue to that degree. And so I think part of this, you know, ability to ensure that that doesn't occur, as you had talked to Sean prior to this, you know, the last shutdown, you know, the economy saw a $3 billion loss. I think that was the number. And and it hasn't recovered over. So I think when you think about those kind of spending and those kind of defense strategies, and even with the military, with so much stuff going on, I don't think the U.S. can afford a disruption. You're seeing that with how both parties came together trying to buy another 45 days to get to the solution. We didn't really see this kind of negotiation the last few times where they were trying to buy more time. I think it's the realization that nothing was going to get done, and how do we avoid the U.S. Going down this track. So I think it was kind of not a surprise, but you know, we will see what happens later tonight. But to buy another 45 days and hopefully not get to push to the end of the 45 days was really interesting.
And just finally, if Democrats help get this through, is this a win for the White House and a loss for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, or is it a win all round?
Yeah, I mean, when you come to this, unfortunately, from my perspective, I mean, nobody's winning. I mean, the U.S. interest needs to kind of move forward and get to the right answer. But yes, I think to your point, the rhetoric coming into this week was, you know, the Republicans had a lot of strong conversations around this, and you know, I'm still waiting to see what happens to the actual deal. Even if they get a deal now, what happens in 45 days? Are we back in the same situation? Is there more negotiations, or you know, what happens next? And so we will see.
All right, Ryan, really appreciate your time. Ryan Patel there, Global Business Executive.